President. For some, expanding the European Union is a goal in itself. For them, an ever closer union is, per definition, an ever-expanding union. The EU as a major worldwide empire that constantly accrues more power, domination and influence to stay relevant. The PVV and the Patriots for Europe see that differently. We see it differently. We need to have political, cultural and natural borders. An ever-expanding union means that we have more net recipients and a smaller group of net contributors, and this redistribution mechanism weakens the EU as a whole. So you have Brussels making decisions, and at the end of the day it's the Dutch citizens who have to foot the bill, and then they have even less to say. You know, at the end of the day we're talking about a union of 30 members, and what would happen to the veto right? That is being attacked. And it is not a good thing. It's not progress if we lose sight of expediency, sovereignty and common sense. We must stop collecting countries like stamps. We need to look at migration, European legislation and enlargement of the Union and say sometimes enough is enough and less is more.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioner. Swedish voters didn't elect me to give away their votes to Brussels, yet that is exactly what this report proposes. Removing national veto powers and centralizing decision-making far from the people. Here is why. Can you explain to Swedish voters why we should grant EU membership to a country that hosts terrorists, fuels organized crime, and drives migration into Europe? Can you convince them that EU citizenship should be handed to 85 million Muslims? Can you persuade Swedish taxpayers that they must pay even more into Brussels? Of course not. That's why you want to take away Sweden's sovereignty. I was sent here to defend Swedish democracy, not to dismantle it, and that is why I vote no. Sweden first, always.
The enlargement of the European Union is a legal and political process. Turning it into a geopolitical tool undermines the treaty for the European Union, and if the veto right is removed, the European Union will turn into a second Soviet Union. The European Union needs to enlarge according to clear criteria and not by convenience. A reform is needed, but we shouldn't rush towards it. Even less should we use it as a mask for authoritarianism and federalization. A similar reform had not been done before the enlargement with the states from Central and Eastern Europe. On the contrary, the candidate countries reformed at the cost of great deprivations. The approach that we are taking leads to ridiculous results. North Macedonia, which is not yet a member of the European Union, is openly advocating for qualified majority vote in the Council. And this is a way to, an attempt to circumvent its commitment that Skopje undertook. But without the right of veto, the European Union will turn into a Soviet Union.
Before thinking of expanding the European Union, we have to solve our own problems. The Union is becoming more and more centralized, looking like a Soviet state. This is not an enviable situation. Corruption has invaded the Union. The freedom of opinion and the freedom of choice have become a contentious subject in our relationship with the United States. This is no longer a common value of the West. We are becoming a military alliance that wants to compete with NATO, and we are becoming a space of economic inequality and impoverishment. The marginal themes of bureaucracy, such as gender identity and climate change, are covering up the true problems of the EU. Here is one of the true problems. Every day, European consumers are disinformed and they are victims of commercial aggression. But the EU is throwing resources into this black hole of the democratic shield in order to promote its bureaucratic apparatus that nobody has ever elected. We no longer have an honorable calling card. How can we expect third countries that want to accede to the European Union to do their own homework when it comes to values and freedoms and honesty and stability? I think we should all clean up our own houses before preparing to invite people over. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues. As someone coming from Central and Eastern Europe, I can say with conviction that enlargement is not only a policy but a promise fulfilled. The EU integration transformed my country. It brought prosperity, democracy and, yes, a lot of common challenges to face. Today we must ensure that the next wave of enlargement brings the same success for both the candidates and the Union itself. That is why I believe we should approach the next enlargement with confidence, not fear. The experience shows that we do not need a fundamental change of our institutional system. What we need is the political will to make existing mechanisms work better, to simplify, not to reinvent. Of course, decision-making can be improved, but efficiency cannot come at the expense of democracy. Smaller and medium-sized member states, those at Europe's geographic and cultural frontiers, must continue to have a meaningful voice. The European Union is strong precisely because it balances unity with diversity, efficiency with equality. On behalf of the EPP Group, I thank all those involved in the preparation of this report. Its content shows us that it is possible to adapt the institutions and their processes to new realities. To put it bluntly, when there is a positive decision on new countries joining the EU, the treaty and our institutions are ready to welcome them. We need to focus on what has always made enlargement a success: merit, fairness and respect among partners. Thank you very much.
Now, discussions on enlargement with the Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, the West Balkans and Turkey show that we are having a headlong dive forward by the Commission. Not at the same stage. Some have been stopped, suspended, because of the criteria that many haven't met. All of these enlargements, were they to go forward, would completely lead to an upheaval of politics at the Council, but also institutionally and budgetary-wise in the EU. Welcoming weak countries, economically or institutionally, would mean that we would redistribute seats, voting rules that would make those that are net contributors of the 24 billion by France, for example, in 2025, that would increase their burden. Now, as a moral imperative, the Commission is trying to centralize power, weaken the voice of nations, and dilute them without any popular legitimacy. Sveg said, when people no longer believe in their own destiny, others will decide in their place. That is why we reject enlargement. It shouldn't be done to the detriment of sovereignty. Thank you, President.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ivailo Valkev.
Thank you, President. Dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, the issue of EU enlargement is a cornerstone for Europe, but I cannot agree that this must happen at all costs, and above all, that we should change the unanimity role in the Council, in other words, repeal the so-called veto. A few days ago, Ms. von der Leyen visited the countries of the Western Balkans and reiterated once again EU support for the region. But I noticed several things. Mr. Vučić focused the discussion on cooperation towards compensation for Serbia because of the U.S. sanctions against the Serbian oil company Niš, whose majority owner was Gazprom, and North Macedonia's Prime Minister Mickoski questioned the country's European integration due to the entry of the Bulgarian community into the constitution. I should say that they are trying to circumvent their commitments. I truly believe that the integration of the Western Balkans will be an enormous benefit to the EU. But for this to happen, it must be subject to clear rules, respect for the Copenhagen criteria, rather than a vague interpretation of the Treaty for the European Union and circumvention of existing rules, such as the proposed institutional reforms contained in this report. Thank you.
Colleagues, if you want to make the EU a centralized state, then you should say that to European citizens. And if you undermine the principle of unanimity, as this report does, then you are attacking member states' sovereignty. Now, you claim that Article 49 allows a transition to qualified majority voting, even without a treaty change. But I think this is misleading. The passerelle clause is in Article 48(7). It does not apply to provisions on membership and accession under Article 49 TEU. Now, you are suggesting that we do away with unanimity when it comes to procedures to protect European values. The court would then become the body to decide on infringements. That very same court, which is such a defender of EU power. Now, these claims do not promote democracy. They actually just make it easier to penalise member states. Colleagues, the EU is already too large, and we are suffering from the paralysing effects of that. Stop using accession talks as a pretext for undermining national sovereignty. Try to restrain your desire for enlargement and get back to the original idea of the EU as a community in which no member can be outvoted on their fundamental interests. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, abolishing unanimity cannot be adopted in two cases: in the reform of the treaties and to enlargement, admitting new members, as long as Turkey, for my country, still defends its casus belli against Greece, as long as Turkey continues to question the sovereign rights of Greece and the sovereignty of Greek islands through the theory of the grey zones, Greece will never consent for the integration of Turkey to SAFE, the Programme for European Defence. As long as Turkey occupies 40% of the Republic of Cyprus, a country, a full member of the EU, as long as Turkey violates international law concerning the law of the sea with the pseudo-Turkish Libyan memo, as long as these are the case, we'll never accept abolishing a veto for the adhesion of new members. Thank you.
President, we're not as concerned about the enlargement as the procedures which erode away its sovereignty. Some want more Europe, but this will mean less sovereignty and less voice and freedom for the nations. They talk about efficiency, but really it's fear. You are scared of the governments who don't share your agenda, but meanwhile, Patriot parties are growing and are bringing power back to the nations. And then you want to attack the independence of nations, which is the only basis for legitimacy. There are no new forums that you're developing where citizens can talk. How many will there be? 300 million, 400 million citizens? You've already forgotten that we already have such fora. They are called elections. And then let me point out that unanimity does have its advantages. When you have unanimity, no one can impose their views on anyone else. It's the best way to maintain sovereignty. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Chair. This is madness, what you're displaying. You want also weaker member states and stronger Brussels to set conditions such as the abolition of the veto for the enlargement is madness. You want to give up more rights to Brussels bureaucrats who are out of touch with reality. And I agree, together with Patriots, that if there were more opportunities to veto, then we would be safer in the EU. There would be less Islamization, European industry would not be stagnating, and there would be no internet censorship. So let me tell you straight, our movement, Patriots for Europe, will never support the abolition of a veto.
Următorul vorbitor, domnul.
Next speaker, Mr. Adrian George Axinia. The Gozi report has to be taught in logic classes in all of Europe. It's a perfect example of correct premises but hallucinating conclusions that cannot possibly run from the premises. We have to discuss how we can help the candidate states how to fulfill the conditions to enter the EU, but the recommendations are preposterous. For instance, abolishing the veto, or giving Ursula von der Leyen total freedom to start the military purchases, the same way she did with the vaccines. And last but not least, bypassing the European Parliament. As a European MEP, I support extending the European Union. There are countries that have already started the process, they have made sacrifices, they have made reforms, they deserve it. But I don't believe that we should couple states together as we have with Ukraine and Moldova. Every state has to be evaluated individually, and that's a more effective approach, and that would help Moldova that is ready and willing to join. Thank you.
President, Commissioner, we're in favour of enlargement, obviously, when it comes to the Western Balkans, because it's a black hole in the middle of Europe which we need to fill. But enlargement shouldn't be an excuse to destroy unanimity, to crush smaller countries or to dilute sovereignty. So be careful with what you say, Mr. Antonio Costa. Costa destroyed Portugal. He'd like to destroy the European Union too, or he's on course to do it. So we must always point out that the member states take precedence over Brussels. It's not the institutions that are lagging behind. No, it's the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is causing difficulties. It's the bureaucrats. Too many bureaucrats, too much bureaucracy, too much red tape. It's not the politicians who are affecting the EU. It's the bureaucratic monster that is our downfall.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. Enlargement is not our internal problem. It also contains a geopolitical dimension. Currently, there's a talk of Ukraine and Moldova joining, but we're forgetting countries of the Western Balkans that have been waiting a long time. And if we now get embroiled in endless debates about treaty changes, we won't find the right solutions for current problems. Remember the debates about European Constitution or the Lisbon Treaty. We lost a number of years now. Some countries, in the meantime, could lose interest in ever joining the EU. And, of course, the EU could collapse, because if we try to centralize too much, some of the countries might want to leave, as was the case of the United Kingdom, and I don't think anybody wants that.